welcome back. It's episode 5 of the fundamentals. Make sure you watch the previous 4 episodes. Going to be talking a lot about the warm-up, how to properly set up, a little bit of core and ab progression, and then shoulder mobility as well. In this episode, we're going to really focus on what are the most common injuries that happen in golf and why do they happen. I'm not going to go too much into detail on how to actually address those impairments because every single one of you who deals with low back pain, wrist pain, shoulder pain, are all going to come in with different deficits. So if I give you all the same 5 exercises, what we call a cookie cutter program, that's not going to address the reason why you're having those issues. You might have shoulder pain because maybe you lack rotation. You might have shoulder pain because you have a tear of one of your rotator cuffs. There's 2 different things there that if I give you a set amount of exercises, they're not going to really do anything for you. So going off of that point, make sure if you're dealing with any type of pain throughout a golf swing, it could be 1 out of 10, it could be 10 out of 10, you should go and get checked out by medical professionals. So at least in New Jersey, we have direct access. You don't need a script to get into PT. If something more serious is going on during your evaluation, the therapist will send you out to the correct provider to get whether it's imaging or surgery if required. But a lot of times with direct access, we're able to just get you in, really see what's going on, and then go from there without having to really mess around with going to too many different providers, which is good. The 3 most common injuries that we usually see, at least as physical therapists for golfers, is definitely put an asterisk on this one, low back pain. So low back pain, a lot of golfers deal with this throughout their time. In general, whether you golf or not, there's probably a good chance you're going to have low back pain sometime in your life. So there might just be a little bit of a correlation there, but we all know the golf swing isn't just here to here. There's a lot of different things moving on in the body. So you're going to have to rotate appropriately around multiple different joints in your body, along with providing a lot of torque in those regions as well. So if you want to hit the ball 300 yards, you're going to have to put a lot of force through different joints, which is okay. Your body can withstand those. But if we're not addressing certain things, or maybe we're swinging the golf club in a certain way, it might predispose us to an injury that might happen down the road. Now, number 2, so I would say 2 and 3 are kind of 50-50. We don't really see one more than the other, but we're going to have elbow pain. And a lot of this comes from our wrist position at impact. So we'll kind of go over, what the wrist is supposed to look like in a golf swing. And why some people might have pain on the inside versus the outside depending on what they're doing in that swing. The last one's going to be shoulder pain. So if we go back and we look at the warm-up, so that's going to be video number 1, we know that both shoulders, no matter if it's our backswing for a righty or a lefty, or our downswing, both shoulders are going to need to get to certain positions. Now, we can work around little impairments, but if you're significantly limited with your ability to get this arm to rotate around this shoulder, you're going to have some difficulty swinging the golf club. And that's only going to put some muscles in that area in a position where they might not be able to withstand some of those forces that you're generating. All right, so one of the main reasons that we have low back pain in the golf swing is something we call reverse spinal. So if we can imagine, right, I'm going to stand here and I'm going to go up to my backswing. So I rotate around, okay? Let's say we get really good here. Our end goal, right, so I'm rotated around this back hip, is to get this right shoulder kind of down towards the ground, right? So I'm side bending to the right. So we can all agree that if I'm starting here, it's a lot easier to just side bend versus if I were to go like this. So this is what the reverse comes in. So if I were to go down, so instead of rotating, I'm more of just leaning forward. How am I going to get from here all the way to there? That's a lot more work, and that's where we can have a little bit of issues going on with our low back. So when we think of golf swing, right, we want to get to the top without dropping this side here. This can go hand in hand with like losing posture, but if we do this consistently over and over and over and over again, where I'm coming forward and then having to get all the way here just to make contact, you can see how much stress that's going to place on the lower back here. So again, I'm not going to go over how to necessarily address that, but a lot of times that comes from either the hips not having enough mobility. So if you think, I get here, right, and I got nowhere to go because I can't turn on this hip anymore, oh, I'll just fall forward. Great, I got a little bit more in what I think of rotation, but how am I going to go from here all the way to here. That's going to require a lot more work of that low back, and it's just not efficient. All right, so the second injury that we see the most in, we're going to go with elbow here. If you're having pain on one side versus the other, so let's say outside versus the in, we know for a fact that your wrist is probably set up in a position that's not optimal for the golf swing. And we call this, you hear it a lot, it's called like a bowed wrist. And we'll look at Dustin Johnson because I think he does a great job of doing this. As we can kind of get a sense here, I want you to look at Justin Johnson's left wrist. So we kind of talked about something we call a bowed wrist. Now I'm going to stop here. So you can already get a sense that this wrist, and this is that bowing that we're talking about. And again, I'm not really too concerned about this top portion here. Some people are going to have more of a straighter. Some will be a little bit more extended, but you can see he presets it here. And you can get a sense that this is flexed, so it's bent forward. So like we kind of mentioned before, that's going to stress the medial side of his wrist. So as he transitions down, you can really get a sense. Look at how much bowing he gets. So when we look at Dustin Johnson, he probably has adequate range of motion shoulder, thoracic spine, so his spine rotates well, and then wrist mobility is probably amazing. That's why he can shallow out this club so well. And as he comes down, get a sense of his wrist is still somewhat flexed at impact. It's not going to be until after that he starts to release that club. So boom, he's in extension now, but you can get a sense on, that's why some golfers are going to have pain on the inside versus the outside, because at impact, great golfers are going to have somewhat of that bowed wrist. They're going to be in flexion. So when we look at that as an amateur golfer, the club does the work for us. We shouldn't have to flip our wrist at impact to get the ball in the air. That's what the loft of the club is made for. And Justin Johnson does a perfect job of doing this. But as we get to the top of the backswing, it doesn't really matter what I do here, right? So let's just do this lead arm. I get to the backswing here, right? When these really good players swing down, or they start going through impact, they start to flex and hinge that wrist because they want to present a little bit less angle when they go, okay. All right, so the next injury we're going to kind of talk about on why it might occur in the golf swing is elbow pain. So there's two kind of elbow pain we see the most in golf. So we either see what we call as golfer's elbow. So that's if I flex this wrist, all those muscles come and attach on this big bone in the middle here. You ever get hit kind of on the back of the elbow and it's like that funny bone? Well, that's the bone that all these muscles that allow you to flex your wrist insert on, okay? Then we have the opposite, so extension. So anytime we grip something, so if I were to really squeeze something, we actually set up a little bit into extension because it just works a lot better optimally for our body mechanics. That fires all these back muscles, and that's what we call tennis elbow. So don't really get mixed up too much on golfers versus tennis because that's just words that were kind of created. It's more of medial or lateral pain and medial pain. So if it's on the outside, that's coming from more of the extensors, okay? Inside's going to come more on the flexors. So if we think of a golfer, right? Let's take Dustin Johnson, for example. He does this really well where, so when he gets here, right, when Dustin Johnson gets to the top, right, it doesn't really matter what his wrists are doing here, but he might preset it. So as he comes down, he's actually presenting less loft to the club, which is why these golfers can hit the ball a mile, because you might be swinging a club that's 40 degrees of loft, and he might be swinging a golf club that's 40 degrees of loft, and you're presenting it at 45 degrees like this. Your ball's going to go a little bit higher versus he's presenting it probably at 30. That's why he's getting so much more distance and we're losing a lot more distance as amateurs. So when we think of that, right, we get to the top and we come down and we're flexing, what's that going to stress? The inside elbow. So a lot of times really good golfers will get pain on the inside or the medial aspect of their elbow because they have to keep that flexion throughout this. You know, if they don't, they're going to end up doing what we as amateurs do, and that's called flipping the wrist. So when we get down here, we sometimes want to force the ball in the air, right? I mean, we all do it. So what we do is we flick the wrist, okay? And what does that do? Well, now that brings these back muscles, or the ones along the back side of the wrist here, into play. So a lot of times you'll see amateur golfers tend to get lateral pain on the outside. Really good golfers tend to get pain on the inside just because of the way they swing the golf club. And a lot of this can stem from Wrist mobility, it can stem from how well are we rotating, how much extension or flexion of the wrist do we really have. So if you're trying to fight something that you don't have or you can't physically do, you're going to be stressing muscles. So that's why it's super important to kind of get evaluated for these kind of things. All right, so the last one's going to be shoulder pain. So the three we're going to go over today big time. So we already went over low back, we already went over elbow pain. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the shoulders. And we can imagine, right, if I'm going to repetitively swing, so think, let's say you're going to shoot 100 on a golf course. You spend maybe 20 minutes warming up, so you hit another 25 golf balls there. You're looking at 125 swings, given 30 are probably putts, so you're looking at maybe 70 swings total. Well, that's a lot of stress. Think of doing that 70 times. If you golf twice a week, you're looking at 140 minimum swings where you're trying to go all out for the most part. So as we kind of get in the golf swing here, so as I go up, you can see this backhand here, right, ultimately is going to be rotating externally. So it's going to rotate towards the back wall, and that requires a lot of, one, mobility, but two, stability of those rotator cuffs to kick in. As we transition, right, and we get through, right, and we're swinging the golf club, you can see now my lead arm is actually having to do the same thing in the backswing or the downswing. So I'm having to get 90 degrees at that angle there. So that's doing the same thing. You know, I had to, one, had the mobility to get there, and two, do I have the, you know, stability to stay in that position? And if I do that repeatedly, whether I'm swinging a driver, whether I'm swinging a long iron, you're going to be putting a lot of torque and force through those joints. And if we don't have the mobility or stability there, you can see why some things are going to kind of arise. A big thing to note too is, you know, as we age, we tend to golf more. So you're looking at a lot of these injuries happening for people between the ages of 40 and 60 because, yeah, when we're 21, great, it might not give us issues, but when we're doing that for 25 years, we're going to have a little bit more issues there. So big thing to think about with shoulder is it's not just there. So anytime you come into an office for a physical therapy examination, they're not going to look at shoulder pain and just look at your shoulders. If they are, you should get out of there really quick. They're going to be looking at probably how your neck moves, how your mid-back moves, just to see is there something going on elsewhere that's leading to that shoulder having to do a lot more work. And you can think, right, if let's say my extension is really limited, so I'm going to turn here. Let's say I'm kind of stuck here. I can't bend at all. I'm really rigid, right? When I get to the top here, we actually tend to extend that upper back a little bit. So if I'm limited there, right, now this shoulder has to do a lot more work to try to get there. Same thing, let's say my hip. Let's say my right hip doesn't have the rotation. So I get here and I'm stuck. This hip does not want to turn any more in. I can't go to there. Let's say I'm stuck here. Well, how am I going to get more swing or more power? I'm going to either have to rotate my upper back or the shoulder a little bit more. So that puts a little bit more stress. So that's why it's super important to get screened. And I keep mentioning it in here. We offer free TPI screens at 3D PT. We have 4 PTs, myself included. I'm over at the Medford office in New Jersey. If you want to get screened, please reach out, call the office, because we look at all these different things. You know, you might be thinking, man, I can't hit the ball as far as I used to because of X, Y, and Z, clubs, this, that, when in reality, you might just lack the hip mobility. You might lack the rotation. You might have a deficit going on at the shoulder. So these are all things we can really address as PTs, and especially in the golf swing, there's so many moving parts. And you'll get a sense of that when we screen you. It's a little bit of everything that you need to do to get to where you need to get to in the golf swing. So again, don't hesitate to reach out. The screens are free. You know, we do a lot of them, so we're getting really good at it. And over the next few months, hopefully as we expand in Medford, we'll start to introduce a little bit more golf-specific things there for you guys to do. So leave a comment if there's anything that you want to see or go over, or especially if you have questions medical-wise. I mean, I'm a licensed physical therapist. I went to school for 7 years to do this stuff. So I have a pretty good understanding of how the body moves, especially in the golf swing too. And now next week, so let's talk a little bit about that. So we've already gone through 5 weeks, great. So we looked at, proper warm-up. We've looked at shoulder mobility exercises. We looked at core progression, and we've also looked at a little bit of setup. Now next week, what we're going to do is how to work through backswing and downswing exercises. So how can we optimize those to increase that power or the rotational or the torque forces that we have there. So we'll focus a lot on exercises next week. I know the first 5 weeks have been more of kind of explanations, but I think that's why it's the fundamentals. I want you guys to get a little bit more of an understanding of what the body's doing in the golf swing, because if you do, it's going to point you in the right direction. You know, you're not going to be trying to do something that maybe you can't physically do, or vice versa. Maybe you have it and you just didn't know that you're supposed to use it. So again, as we kind of move forward, I think we'll start to transition a little bit more into exercise-based things, which is great for everybody, and we'll kind of go from there.